Hey folks, welcome back to Animal Quest. In this episode, I will let you know what happens when nature's most venomous creatures encounter humans who underestimate their abilities. From amateur overconfident people who attempted their own rescues to experienced workers entering habitats that proved too dangerous even for them, they all end up making the same mistake, confusing predictability with safety. Let's begin with the case of Graham Hall, a middle-aged caretaker whose final shift before leaving the caretaking job forever actually ended up being his last shift on this planet. It was late October 2021, on the outskirts of Cairns, in Queensland, Australia. The property sat between developed land and stretches of semi-rural bushland. Sugarcane fields, drainage channels, and old maintenance structures created an environment that attracted rodents in significant numbers. And wherever rodents flourish, predators eventually follow. Australia has the reputation of being the kingdom of exotic and the most dangerous wild animals. This region in particular was home to one of Australia's most well-known reptiles, the eastern brown snake. Despite its reputation, the species is not naturally aggressive. Wildlife experts consistently describe the animal as defensive rather than an aggressive predator. Most of its encounters with the townspeople ended up fairly non-violent, with the snake attempting to avoid people altogether. This behavior was routine for the snake, any uncomfortable confrontation, and it would flee the scene. The problem arose when escape was no longer an option a caretaker, Graham Haller, snatched from the snake. For nearly 25 years, he had worked as the caretaker and grounds manager for a small eco-lodge operating outside the city limits. He knew every trail, every shed, and every storage space on the property. Visitors revered him. Local workers looked up to him. He had the reputation of being fearless. Cobras, pythons, or brown snakes. He had tamed all of them. The matter of fact is, Graham trusted his gut more than anything. It wasn't survival to him. It was just vibes. This confidence led him to become unfearful of the wild. The transition from caution to carelessness rarely announces itself. It happens gradually. Every time Graham fought and remained unscathed, it amplified his trust in himself. The week leading up to the incident had been unusually busy. Heavy rains earlier in the month had increased rodent activity, a trend that occurs during every monsoon. Maintenance work had been postponed repeatedly. On that particular morning, feeling particularly bored, Graham decided to handle the task himself. He had no fear of being alone or working whilst others were waiting for the right opportunity to start. He started on his own, a decision he would later come to regret. The building in question had not been properly cleaned for months. Old timber panels, sheets of rusted metal, worn-down gardening supplies, and unused equipment had accumulated along the interior walls. To Graham, it was simply another routine job. To the snakes, it presented as their home. Concealed spaces protect from predators, provide stable temperatures, and provide access to prey. From a snake's point of view, an abandoned storage structure can be ideal real estate. Several staff members later recalled offering to assist Graham with the cleanup. He declined. His boastfulness about his extensive experience handling the wild left him no choice but to do this alone. But he forgot one thing. Experience can only reduce uncertainty. It does not eliminate risk. Experience can only prepare someone to deal with the unexpected, not eradicate the chances of uncertainty from happening. As the morning progressed, Graham worked methodically through the structure. Broken tools were discarded. Old containers were reorganized. Loose materials were stacked near the entrance. Any rubbish that had no purpose was discarded and thrown into big bins. In just a short amount of time, the worn-down shed felt like a much cleaner space that harbored no staleness or clutter. The cleaner the shed got, the more Graham worked to make sure everything fell right into place. For hours, nothing appeared unusual, and that is precisely how most dangerous wildlife encounters begin. Not with warnings, not with obvious signs, but with ordinary moments that convince people everything is under control, and all of a sudden, something unexpected grips their existence and makes it impossible for them to leave. Eventually, Graham reached a section of rusted metal sheets leaning against the back wall. Rodent droppings were visible nearby. There were also indications that small animals had been moving through the area during recent weeks. In hindsight, those details mattered. At the time, they seemed insignificant. Graham took one of the metal sheets in his hands, which were now visibly grubby, and began pulling it away from the wall. What happened next lasted only seconds. The snake had likely been sheltering beneath the materials and was suddenly exposed without warning. This must have startled the reptile, and it did what it knew best: retaliate. Cornered wildlife rarely thinks about predation. It thinks about survival, about retaliating from the visible threat. And to the snake, its sudden loss loss of shelter felt like a harmful threat that needed intervention. The eastern brown reacted exactly as biology intended: a rapid defensive strike, an immediate attempt to withdraw, nothing more. There was no pursuit, no prolonged confrontation, no deliberate attack, just an animal responding to immediate danger in the only way it understood. The strike was so swift that Graham had almost no time to react. Within just seconds, everything changed. He was now in a life-or-death situation, as the bite was quite intense and the fangs punctured his forearm. After he realized what had happened, he immediately backed off as an instinct and fell onto the ground after colliding with the nearby rubble of metal scraps and wooden sticks. He tried to rip his shirt off and wrap it firmly around the limb as a pressure bandage, but he didn't have enough strength to rip off his shirt and wrap it around himself. He needed sustenance. He required support, but at that moment, he had none, something he was used to. He had done things alone, but this time was different. His biggest flex had turned into his biggest regret. With no one by his side to aid him, he had to do it all alone. Graham managed to move away from the area and ran outside. In the meantime, the snake hid behind the remaining metal scraps and sought refuge again after retaliating against its enemy. The surrounding area was quite lonesome, and Graham had to walk for quite a while before he could reach the crowd, something he had no capacity for doing. After a few steps, he collapsed on the ground, checking in and out of consciousness every second. After half an hour had already passed, a local worker saw him and immediately rushed to help him. By that time, he had become unresponsive. Emergency services were contacted afterwards as a last resort, but it was too late. Recklessness and a lack of immediate intervention to help Graham led to his demise. Wildlife authorities later secured the site, because the greatest danger was never the presence of wildlife itself. It was the assumption that years of routine had made the impossible impossible. Nature does not make those promises, and it never has, and it never will. While Graham's overconfidence had solid roots, his extensive experience with the wild, this next case is the complete opposite. A venomous black mamba and an amateur who had only manhandled snakes on VR and video games. He thought his virtual experience granted him immunity to the black mamba's ruthless attacks, but this thought led him to dig his own grave. It was February 8th, 2022, on the outskirts of Durban, South Africa. The summer heat had been relentless for weeks. Urban development was on the rise. Residential developments continued expanding into areas that had once belonged entirely to wildlife, creating inevitable points of contact between humans and animals whose land it actually was. Among those animals was one of Africa's most feared, yet most misunderstood reptiles, the black mamba. Its reputation often ignites fears in the hearts of the people, but its story is often exaggerated rather than paired with actual historical facts. Stories portray it as aggressive, belligerent, and eager to attack people. Wildlife specialists paint a completely different picture. Black mambas prefer escape over attacks. In the options of fight or flight, they often choose flight. Their speed exists to avoid danger, not pursue it. The problems begin when the mamba has no other escape, apart from having to confront. Daniel Hartley was 48 years old. He had lived in the region for most of his life and considered himself carefree around wildlife. That attitude served him well in many areas of life. Wild animals were not one of them. Daniel had a keen interest in snakes. Growing up in Africa, he had encountered quite a few in his childhood but never manhandled one. Over the years, Daniel started watching countless online videos featuring experienced snake removers, calm voices, controlled movements, successful captures that appeared straightforward to anyone observing from behind a screen. The internet has a remarkable ability to make specialized skills look ordinary. It rarely portrays the efforts it took over the years and the rigorous training required to perform them safely. He then elevated to playing snake capturing games on his VR set. Behind a guarded screen, catching or even killing a snake seemed like child's play to him. Preload game graphics are an entirely different ballpark than having to actually capture snakes, a difference that cannot be overlooked, but it certainly was overlooked. To Daniel, removing a snake seemed simple. Keep your distance, stay calm, use the right tools. The animal gets into your captivity. Done and dusted. Reality, however, tends to be way less cliche. It doesn't guarantee a safe escape. That particular afternoon, neighbors reported seeing a large snake moving between properties near a detached garage behind Daniel's home. The sighting quickly attracted attention. People gathered, phones emerged, advice was offered from every direction. Someone suggested contacting professional wildlife responders. Daniel declined. He believed help would take too long to arrive. After all, he felt like he had already done way too many times, albeit on a screen. But but nonetheless, he had seen enough demonstrations to understand what needed to be done. Or so he thought. Confidence is dangerous because it often resembles competence. From a distance, the two can look identical. The difference usually becomes obvious only after mistakes have already been made. Daniel retrieved a long garden tool and approached the snake alone. Witnesses later recalled that the snake showed no interest in confrontation. It moved deeper into shaded areas and repeatedly attempted to avoid open spaces occupied by people. Everything about its behavior indicated one objective: escape. But humans frequently misinterpret retreat as defeat, and defeat entices the victor. And Daniel felt like a victor. He wanted to savor this moment of triumph, so he kept following the snake. Every step induced panic in the snake. With no escape plan, the snake was now being cornered, something it despises. Every movement narrowed potential exits. Eventually, the snake positioned itself near stacked materials against a wall. Wildlife experts later explained that this represented the exact scenario professionals attempt to avoid. A frightened animal, no plan B, just pure survival mode. The ingredients for a disaster were already set in motion. The outcome was already decided. It was simply yet to come. Daniel attempted to reposition the snake using the tool. The animal moved away. He advanced further. Its posture changed, a sign that should have been vital for Daniel to know that it's the last resort. When Daniel crouched down to try to catch the snake in a net bag he had brought with him, his face became a critical spot that was in the line of sight of the snake. It launched forward, attacking Daniel on the neck, the most critical area in a snake attack. Panic set in. It's almost as if the crowd knew that this was bound to happen. They were just waiting for the moment to actually manifest in reality. Daniel let out a blood-curdling scream. He knew it was over. All his binge-watching and playing simulation games had not prepared him for this scenario. He immediately collapsed onto the ground as the venom started kicking in. Emergency services and licensed responders were eventually contacted by nearby residents. The incident prompted renewed discussions throughout local communities regarding wildlife education and the importance of leaving animal removals to trained professionals. Officials emphasized a simple reality afterward. The snake had not entered the encounter searching for conflict. It had attempted to avoid it from beginning to end. Daniel walked right to his death. This next one had already defeated death, but still it came back from the afterlife to take him with it. A beheaded snake that looked as dead as it could get, and a chef preparing a 5-star meal. What happened next was pure depravity. The threat wasn't over. It had just begun, and the chef had not realized it. It was May 17th, 2019, on the outskirts of Houston, Texas. The city was known for many things. Fine dining was certainly one of them. Restaurants competed vigorously with competitors, inventing exotic dishes that would catch the curiosity of the rich, with chefs constantly searching for ingredients and experiences capable of separating them from everyone else. Innovation demands attention, but attention is often a double-edged sword. Marcus Nelson was 51 years old. He was an accomplished executive chef who had spent nearly 3 decades in professional kitchens. He was a Michelin star chef who had traveled to countries like China and Japan and learnt quite a few exotic dishes involving snakes. If an unusual ingredient appeared on the market, Marcus wanted to understand it. If a traditional preparation existed somewhere in the world, Marcus wanted to master it. Experience had taught him many lessons. Unfortunately, a snake's behavioral biology wasn't one of them. On that eventful day, Marcus was planning on making a few exotic dishes he hadn't made before to present to his customers in the upcoming weeks. An innocent, eccentric interest that caused irreparable damage. One item enticed him more than the other options: rattlesnake. The practice itself was not unheard of. Various communities across the United States have prepared rattlesnake meat for generations, but preparing venomous reptiles carries responsibilities far beyond cooking and cleaning and merges into the survival of the snake, even after its death. The danger does not automatically disappear once the animal dies. The severed head of a venomous snake can retain reflexive biting capability for a considerable period of time. The nervous system does not cease functioning immediately. Instinctive responses remain. Venom remains, and neither recognizes that the rest of the body is gone. Marcus, however, believed the risk had ended. After all, the snake was dead. That assumption would define everything that followed. The kitchen was unusually quiet that evening. Most employees had already finished their shifts. Marcus remained behind to complete preparations alone. Solitude creates efficiency. It also eliminates assistance when efficiency fails. His colleague chopped off the head of the snake before heading out, leaving only Marcus and the snake in the entire building. He started skinning the snake's body as the head lay beside the cutting board, not too far from Marcus's hand. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, and zero movement. That's a dead snake, or that's what Marcus believed. But biology intended otherwise. Even if the snake was practically dead, its reflexes were not. As soon as Marcus attempted to pick up the knife lying beside the rattlesnake's head, that fact fact was made definitive. The severed head reflexively snapped shut as his hand came within range. It delivered a full, venomous bite. The snake was dead, but its instincts were not. And at that moment, its instincts were heightened. Marcus couldn't believe what had happened. He tried to rip the head off his arms, but to no avail. Who knew such a tiny, severed head would cause such chaos? He immediately fell back with the snake's survival instincts finally running out. It fell off his arm, but it was too late. The venom had penetrated too deeply. With no one by his side, he attempted to reach his phone to call 911. He knew that within minutes, his body would start shutting down. He started searching for his phone, but to no avail. Panic was already in swing, and he was too preoccupied with the pain to think clearly. He went into a state of delirium. Muffled breaths, blurred vision, shivering and limping of muscles were all that was left of him, a fate far too painful. Emergency responders were eventually summoned after concerns arose regarding Marcus's absence from scheduled commitments later that evening. He was found unconscious on the floor beside the rattlesnake's head, a scenery that was too ironic. The incident prompted renewed discussions among wildlife officials and culinary professionals regarding the handling of venomous species. Their message remained straightforward. A venomous animal does not instantly become harmless once it dies, and it must be treated like a dangerous being even after its head is chopped off. While Marcus's fate was a personal tragedy, this next one actually involved a natural tragedy: destroyed households, unusual quiet, and a distant looming threat. When a woman returned to the flattened wreck, she met the worst possible outcome. It was August 26, 2017, near Ciudad Bolívar, Venezuela. Weeks of relentless rainfall had transformed entire communities. Riverbanks overflowed, roads vanished beneath muddy currents, families evacuated with whatever was left with them. When the floodwaters finally began to retreat, residents returned to reclaim what remained of their lives. But people were not the only beings searching for dry land. Wildlife had been displaced as well. Among the animals forced into unfamiliar territory were pit vipers that normally remained hidden within forests and wetlands far from human activity. The floods ignored every natural habitat and destroyed all of them at once. Maria Ortega was 63 years old. She had spent nearly her entire life in the region and had endured seasonal flooding on multiple occasions. Difficult circumstances were nothing new to her. This time, however, was different. The destruction stretched across entire neighborhoods. Years of memories sat ruined beneath layers of silt and debris. In such a difficult situation, she, much like the others, had to flee. After weeks had passed, the situation calmed down, and Maria was eager to come back. Like countless others returning home, Maria focused entirely on rebuilding. The danger she was prepared for included the sudden collapse of weak buildings and muddy water, not from reptiles. That assumption would prove to be her greatest mistake. Snakes, rodents, and countless other dangerous animals often seek temporary shelter inside homes abandoned during evacuations. The animals are not invading human territory out of habit. It's purely out of survival, and survival has a way of placing humans and wildlife in the same location. Maria spent most of the morning clearing her living room. After such a long time, it felt like her life was returning to normalcy. Normality creates comfort. Comfort lowers vigilance, and vigilance is often the first thing people need after surviving a disaster. By the afternoon, Maria turned her attention toward an outdoor storage area behind her home. Flood debris had accumulated against the walls. Several tons of furniture were displaced by the strong currents and were crammed into a small space. From a human perspective, it was simply another unpleasant task waiting to be completed. From an animal's perspective, it represented shelter, shade, protection, isolation, everything necessary to endure uncertain conditions. Wildlife experts later explained that snakes displaced by floods generally become more defensive. A threat to their life increases their defensiveness. Exhaustion changes behavior. Most importantly, the loss of familiar escape routes changes behavior. As Maria began moving damaged materials, the environment transformed instantly. The shade over the pit viper vanished completely. Animals confronted with sudden exposure make decisions quickly. Maria was startled upon encountering a viper in a place she had never expected. In a panic, she dropped the material onto the ground, alarming the snake's survival instincts. It bit her lower leg. With the venom starting to take effect, she had no time left. Either give up or fight until her last breath. But Maria was already in a panic. After being bitten, she scrambled, not knowing what to do. Her focus was not on the bite, but on the snake that was in her proximity. She grabbed a stick, trying to scare the snake away. The neighbors did not know what was happening. She was simply fighting it all alone. But after being bitten, immense pain started affecting her. The bitten area was severely swelling, making her unable to walk towards her phone for help. help. She then collapsed. Several hours passed and no one saw her. Concerns grew, so the neighbors went up to check on her, but what they discovered was Maria, laying on the ground with no signs of movement. Emergency services were immediately called, but it was far too late. The venom injected has caused severe clotting abnormalities to her blood. Shock has settled in, and extensive tissue destruction was already observed. Maria died, despite being treated. The lesson remained remarkably simple. Disasters mess up not only human habitats, but animal ones too. And rebuilding after a disaster includes much more than just rearranging furniture. The next case demonstrates a problem that has become increasingly common in the age of social media. People no longer want to simply witness wildlife. They want to place themselves inside the experience. The animal becomes the backdrop, the person becomes the subject, and somewhere along the way, respect gives way to performance. It was April 12, 2019, near Puerto Princesa on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. The region was internationally recognized for its extraordinary biodiversity. Dense forests, agricultural land, and remote villages created an environment where humans and wildlife frequently occupied the same spaces. Among the animals native to the area was the Philippine cobra, feared throughout the country, yet profoundly misunderstood. Contrary to popular belief, cobras prefer loneliness. The famous hood itself serves a simple purpose. It is a warning, an opportunity for the threat to leave before the situation becomes worse. Unfortunately, humans do not always understand warnings delivered by nature. Ethan Wright was 28 years old. A tourist from Australia, he had spent several weeks traveling across Southeast Asia documenting his experiences online. Photography formed a major part of that journey. Every destination became content. Every encounter became an opportunity. The rarer the subject, the greater the reward. Friends described Ethan as adventurous and outgoing. Critics might have used a different word, overconfident, sometimes excessively so. That afternoon, Ethan joined several residents walking near agricultural fields outside the city. The weather remained humid. Visibility was excellent. Nothing suggested the day would become memorable, until someone noticed movement near the edge of the path. Resting among low vegetation was a cobra. The reaction among locals was immediate. Fear rang through everyone. Ethan felt something different, an opportunity. Social media has transformed unusual encounters into valuable currency. He wanted to prove he was the bravest, and a selfie with a snake is definitive proof. Nature, however, does not care about proof. It cares about boundaries. At first, Ethan remained several meters away. The arrangement was ideal. The snake remained undisturbed. The people remained safe. The encounter could have ended there. Most responsible wildlife interactions do, but satisfaction is a moving target. So Ethan moved closer, then closer again. Observers later recalled that the cobra responded exactly as wildlife experts would expect. It did not advance. It did not pursue. It did not seek conflict. Instead, it felt threatened, and cobras rarely let go of threats. Warnings that generations of humans have recognized for centuries. The message remained simple: stay back and stay safe. But this is something Ethan couldn't grasp. Ethan eventually positioned himself so that both he and the snake occupied the same frame. His body came into the direct line of sight of the snake. As soon as the distance shortened, the instincts of the snake felt aroused. Within just seconds, the scenario changed. What once felt like a timid snake now widened its mouth and struck Ethan's arm. Ethan let out a blood-curdling scream once he realized that his selfie encounter cost him a lot more than he bargained for. The venom from the bite was traveling through his bloodstream rapidly. Once the snake bit its opponent, it swiftly retreated, leaving Ethan in intense pain. He quickly backed off and immediately asked for help. Locals immediately told him to stay still while they called for help, but due to the location he was in, emergency services took a considerable amount of time before they reached him. Time passed. Ethan started developing neurological symptoms. His eyelids started dropping, his speech was slurred, and signs of difficult breathing were visible. He was then rushed to the nearest hospital, but despite the emergency treatment, Ethan took his last breath. What started as a fun venture turned into a nightmare for Ethan. While this case was purely self-inflicted, the next case reminds us that the wilderness does not stop being wild simply because humans decide to spend the night there. People often view campsites as temporary homes. Animals view them as threats in an environment they rule. The difference matters. It was September 3rd, 2017, in the rugged terrain surrounding Sedona, Arizona. The summer heat had finally begun to subside. Tourists arrived from across the country seeking solitude, breathtaking landscapes, and a brief escape from urban life. Among them was 34-year-old Michael King, an experienced hiker, a careful planner, and someone who believed that experience alone could account for every possible risk. Nature rarely agrees with that assumption. Michael had spent years exploring remote locations throughout the American Southwest. He understood weather patterns, navigation techniques, and emergency aids. What he underestimated was something far simpler: routine. The more familiar a person becomes with outdoor environments, the easier it becomes to overlook basic precautions. On that day, Michael established a camp near a rocky terrain, several miles away from established tourist routes, a decision that would turn out to be far more dangerous than he anticipated. He wanted seclusion, but he got supervision. Among the species inhabiting the region was the western diamondback rattlesnake. Contrary to popular mythology, these creatures, as scary as they sound, do not seek human encounters. The iconic rattle itself serves as a warning system, a final attempt to avoid direct conflict. The animal wants distance, nothing more. As night fell, Michael started setting up his camp. His hiking boots, his coffee mug, and his maps. All were packed in tightly. As for his sleeping arrangement, he brought his favorite sleeping bag, comfortable yet risque. Nothing felt out of the ordinary until it actually was. What amplified the danger was the fact that Michael had taken his diabetic medication in the evening, causing him to act a little limp. He was extremely tired and wanted to pass out as soon as setting up camp. He lay in his sleeping bag and fell into a deep slumber. The danger struck as soon as he became carefree. Wildlife officials later emphasized an important reality regarding camping in snake habitats. Gear left undisturbed overnight can provide temporary shelter for reptiles seeking protection from temperature fluctuations and predators. The animals are not attracted to people. They are attracted to conditions, shade, warmth, security. A rattlesnake managed to get attracted by his elaborate tent arrangement and went in, an unwanted intruder. Michael was too tired from the journey to be woken up by such a little disturbance. The rattlesnake, however, kept on going. He eventually reached the sleeping bag where Michael was residing and went inside, a perfect place for warmth and comfort. The snake resided inside the bag alongside Michael, who was too tired to notice anything. During his sleep, he felt something on his chest. Assuming it was a moth, he flared his arms, but what happened next made him realize what kind of horrifying creature was actually lying on his chest. He woke up to a snake sitting on his chest. Panic set in. He tried pushing it away. The snake also sensed a threat. It bit into Michael's neck. A fatal move. A swift strike, injecting venom and retreating instantaneously. There was nothing he could do. Alone in the outskirts of the terrain, in the middle of the night, fate was not on Michael's side. After this short attack, the rattlesnake retreated. Meanwhile, Michael was in immense pain. He went unconscious. The next morning, other hikers gathered and saw the gruesome scene. One wrong decision, and Michael lost his life. Emergency responders and park officials subsequently renewed educational campaigns encouraging campers to inspect gear carefully, secure belongings, and remain aware that wildlife continues operating long after humans fall asleep. The lesson was straightforward. The wilderness does not belong to visitors. Hence, when visiting, cautiousness is a must-have attitude. The final case demonstrates a lesson that riverside communities across the world have understood for generations. Water provides life, but life attracts everything else that depends on it, including predators that humans rarely see until the distance between them disappears entirely. It was June 14th, 2016. Near Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela. The region supported thousands of families whose livelihoods depended on fishing. Before sunrise, small boats routinely departed into the darkness, while the rest of the world remained asleep. For many residents, the river was not an adventure, it was work. And working along the riverside for extensive periods of time created a false sense of security. A security that the unfamiliar is never going to happen. But the irony is, nature has never made that promise. Among the countless species inhabiting the wetlands surrounding the lake was the fer-de-lance, a snake feared throughout Central and South America, not because it actively seeks humans, but because human activity frequently overlaps with the places it prefers. Dense vegetation, riverbanks, moist environments rich with small animals. The same conditions that support fishermen also support wildlife. Miguel Herrera was 46 years old. He had spent most of his life on the water. If anyone understood the lake, it was Miguel. At least that was the belief. Experience teaches patterns. It does not eliminate uncertainty. That particular morning began like countless others before it. Miguel left home long before sunrise. The air remained heavy with humidity. Visibility was limited, but nothing appeared unusual. For local fishermen, such conditions were entirely ordinary. Ordinary situations often produce extraordinary consequences. Upon reaching one of his traditional fishing locations, Miguel discovered that sections of his nets had become tangled among vegetation near the shoreline. It was frustrating, but part of the routine. Miguel secured his boat and stepped toward the bank to free the equipment. The surrounding vegetation appeared dense but manageable. The fer-de-lance was seeking refuge in the tangled nets, a fact unbeknownst to Miguel. Miguel focused entirely carefully on the nets. Years of routine had conditioned his attention toward the task at hand. Untangle the lines, secure the equipment, continue working. The snake had likely remained motionless throughout the encounter. Movement attracts attention. As the surrounding vegetation shifted, circumstances changed instantly. Escape routes narrowed. The environment that had provided concealment moments earlier no longer offered the same protection. Left with no other options, the snake started preparing to retaliate if this disruption continued. As there was no inclination in Miguel's mind that a snake was camouflaged here, he kept on going. When his hands reached the line of attack, the snake took this opportunity and struck, a move that changed the ordinary day of working into a nightmare fuel, fast, ferocious, and unforgiving. One brutal attack was enough to make Miguel fall back and scream in intense agony. He had made contact with one of the most dangerous and venomous snakes, and the result isn't always safe. The snake was still lying inside the tangled nets. Miguel rushed with whatever strength he had left and called for help. The elders of the village tried providing first aid, but this case is different than normal injuries. It involved a snake. Emergency services were called, but not fast enough. Hours went by believing the bite was not life-threatening, and no major concerns should be placed after being bitten. But his judgment was wrong. Several hours had passed before rescue arrived, but by the time he reached medical care, the venom had caused extensive tissue destruction, severe clotting abnormalities, and shock. Despite treatment, he succumbed to the effects of the bite.